When I uncovered their affair, I stayed silent. For weeks, I watched them, Mark, my husband, and Lydia, the woman who thought she could destroy me, unravel under their own arrogance. In the heart of Chicago, amidst the glittering skyline and high society facades, I observed every misstep, catalogued every weakness, and quietly set the stage for inevitability. From subtle disruptions to psychological manipulation, I orchestrated chaos without raising my voice, ensuring that every fracture, every panic, and every public embarrassment appeared accidental, until the final twist at Lydia's luxurious wedding. Through patience, precision, and observation, I reclaimed my power without confrontation, witnessing their collapse from a place of calculated control. In the end, victory was quiet, measured, and absolute, because true strength lies not in noise or fury, but in silence, strategy, and inevitability. I've always believed that Chicago winters teach people the truth about themselves. The cold strips everything down: noise, excuses, illusions. It leaves behind only what is real. Maybe that's why the truth found me in winter. Or maybe it had always been there, waiting for the temperature to drop low enough that I could no longer ignore the chill creeping through my life. My name is Jane, and this is the story of how I discovered their affair, and why I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because silence has a way of echoing louder than rage. Especially in rooms full of people who think they're untouchable. Chicago has a rhythm. The elevated trains roaring overhead, the lake wind slashing between glass towers, the smell of roasted peanuts drifting near Millennium Park. I had built a calm life here. A quiet apartment near the river, blueprints scattered across my dining table, warm tea, long coats, the hum of design models rendering on my laptop. I wasn't glamorous or loud. Not like her. Not like the woman who would soon take everything I thought was mine. But we'll get there. For now, in those early days, I believed I was loved. I believed Mark, my fiancé, was still the man who held my hand on the Navy Pier Ferris wheel. The man who promised warmth in a city built on steel and wind. I didn't yet know that promises can freeze and shatter. It began with something small. They always do. A late-night text that lit up his screen while we were watching a documentary. The kind he pretended to enjoy for my sake. He tilted the phone away. Just slightly. Barely noticeable. Unless you were looking for it. I wasn't. But my instincts were. The message preview disappeared too fast. Too deliberate. Like a shadow retreating. I asked nothing. He offered nothing. Silence filled the space where truth should have lived. I felt the Chicago winter settle a little deeper into my bones. One evening, he came home smelling of someone else's perfume. Not floral. Not soft. A sharp, expensive scent that didn't belong to me or any store on his route. He brushed past me with a distracted kiss. As if rehearsing affection rather than offering it. Again, I said nothing. Not yet. Revenge doesn't grow in loud places. It grows in quiet ones. In the spaces between suspicion and confirmation. And I was starting to listen. Carefully. 3 days later, the truth arrived wrapped in a gold-trimmed envelope addressed to him. An invitation to a wedding I had never heard about. A wedding he forgot to mention. A wedding hosted by Chicago's most elitist, headline-hungry family. A wedding where the bride's name would make my blood run cold. But I didn't know that yet. I was still turning the envelope in my hands when the door opened behind me. "Jane," he said. "Don't open that." He grabbed the envelope, sliding it into his coat like it was contraband. "It's just a business thing," he said. Too fast. Too smooth. Like a script he'd rehearsed in the mirror. I simply watched him. Not accusing. Not emotional. Just watching. And I saw it. That flicker of fear when people realize the narrative is slipping out of their hands. He thought I was clueless. That was his first mistake. I wasn't clueless. I was observant. I wasn't confrontational. I was patient. Patience is the sharpest knife a betrayed woman can wield. It was a Thursday. Cold. The kind of cold that makes the river steam. He said he had a late meeting. I nodded, kissed him goodbye, and locked the door. The moment his footsteps faded, I sat on the floor with my coat still on, hands shaking not from fear, but from the clarity settling over me. I wasn't going to follow him. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to break down. No, I was going to wait. And observe. And gather proof like snow gathering on a rooftop. Quiet. Steady. Unstoppable. Because I knew something he didn't. When you give deceit enough silence, It exposes itself. 2 nights later, he showered after another meeting. His phone buzzed on the counter. A voice message. From a woman. I shouldn't have listened. But I did. Her voice was light. Confident. Expensive. Mark, the tasting went beautifully. The ballroom is perfect. And I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I miss you. Lydia. Lydia. The Lydia. Chicago's luxury event darling. A woman whose face graced magazines. A socialite whose wedding was rumored to cost more than most homes. His voice echoed from the bathroom, carefree, unaware that every tile around him was shifting. My fiancé was having an affair with a woman whose wedding invitation he tried to hide. A wedding scheduled in a month. A wedding where he wasn't the groom. Not yet, but he was clearly something else. And I stayed silent. Because silence was about to become my greatest weapon. The morning after hearing her message, I woke to a version of silence I had never felt before. Not peaceful. Not empty. Just concentrated, like the world was holding its breath with me. Mark was still asleep beside me, face relaxed, innocent in a way that made the truth even colder. I watched him for a moment, not for sentimentality, but for calibration. Studying a man who didn't know he had just become a character in the story of his own downfall. He shifted, muttered something about a meeting. Of course. I slipped out of bed with the kind of careful steps you take around a sleeping animal. Not out of fear, but to avoid waking something that's easier to observe from a distance. I made coffee. I waited. Chicago mornings have a way of scraping the sky. Raw gray clouds dragged across buildings like bruises. That morning, they matched my mood perfectly. Mark entered the kitchen rubbing his eyes, acting like nothing at all had fractured the night before. He kissed my cheek, thanked me for the coffee, and began the usual rush for his early meeting. His normalcy was almost insulting. As he walked toward the door, I asked him one thing. A test small but pointed. Will you be home for dinner? He hesitated. A fraction of a second. But hesitation is a confession when you know what to look for. I'll try, he said. Another script line. Another small crack. I nodded with a calm I didn't feel. Or maybe, one I had grown into overnight. He left. And the lock clicked behind him like a seal on a file I had just opened. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger clouds vision. I needed clarity. I sat with my coffee, pulled my hair into a bun, and opened my laptop not for work, but for research. Lydia Fairmont. A name that yielded pages of glossy photos, charity galas, awards ceremonies, partnerships with luxury brands. The kind of woman who thrived under chandelier lighting. Her wedding announcement was everywhere. Chicago's sweetheart to wed real estate heir in grand winter ceremony. She wasn't marrying Mark. But she was using him. Or he was using her. Or they were using each other. The point was, I was no longer a spectator. I was a hidden variable in their equation. And they had no idea how powerful an invisible force can be. I scrolled through her engagement photos, until I found something that made my jaw freeze mid-breath. In the background of one of the shots, reflected faintly in a decorative mirror, was Mark, standing at the edge of the room, watching her, watching them. The photo had gone viral. Millions had seen it. But only I knew the man reflected there. They weren't even being careful. I didn't check his phone. I didn't track his car. Those moves are loud, desperate, frantic. I was none of those things. Instead, I studied patterns. Mark's schedule shifted subtly. Late meetings increasing. Weekend site visits. Early morning texts he pretended were reminders. I began placing his lies side by side until they formed a mosaic. Every mosaic tells a picture. This one told betrayal. But I still didn't confront him. Not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I wanted the truth to reveal itself in its entirety before I moved. And it would. Because people who believe they've outsmarted consequences become careless. 3 days into my silent observation, Mark walked into the apartment holding a small velvet box. I didn't move. He handed it to me with a smile strained at the edges. A gift, he said. A peace offering disguised as romance. Inside was a necklace. Beautiful, expensive, hollow. He was trying to distract me. He must have sensed the atmosphere shifting. Maybe my silence was too sharp, but I played my role flawlessly. It's lovely, I said softly. The truth? It felt like a bribe from a guilty man who couldn't afford suspicion. He exhaled in relief. That told me more than any confession. Guilty men fear calm women. 2 nights later, more lies. More scripted excuses. More performances. He said he was going to a late dinner with clients. He forgot to change his cologne, the one he only wore on special occasions. I didn't follow him physically. That would break the quiet war I was waging. Instead, I followed the digital noise. Lydia's event team had posted a story, a behind-the-scenes glimpse of the wedding preparations. And in a corner of the frame, barely visible, was a familiar silhouette. Mark, holding her coat, laughing. His laugh was different with me. With her, it sounded free. But I didn't break, didn't scream, didn't collapse. I simply closed the app, set my phone down, and stared at the window. Chicago's skyline glittered. Thousands of lights, each a story I wasn't part of. Yet, then came the moment that shifted everything. An email notification appeared on my screen, from an unknown address. Subject line: "You don't know me, but you should know the truth about Mark." I stared at the subject line as if it were a hand reaching through the screen and gripping my throat. "You don't know me, but you should know the truth about Mark." It pulsed on the display, demanding oxygen. Silence wrapped around me so tightly that I could hear my own heartbeat steady, calm, controlled, but undeniably alert. For a moment, I didn't open it. I let the weight of it settle. People don't send emails like that unless something has snapped inside them. Fear, guilt, or desperation. Whatever it was, it had finally reached me. With a slow breath, I clicked. The email was short. Too short. "Jane, you don't know me, but I've seen you before. He talks about you. Not in the way you deserve. I think you already suspect something. You're right. Check the hotel on Madison. Room 841. Tonight after 9. Don't respond to this email. Don't say you were there. Just see the truth with your own eyes. A friend you didn't know you had." I read it once, twice, a third time. Each read stripped another layer off my denial, like winter wind tearing at loose threads. A hotel. A room number. A time. It felt like a trap, yet the truth is often delivered in uncomfortable packages. And the phrase "I've seen you before," that lingered. Someone was watching us, me, Mark, our dissolving relationship. But who? And why? Help me. Part of me whispered to ignore it. That this could be bait, manipulation, or a cruel stranger's game. But my instincts, the same instincts that noticed Mark tilting his phone, that tasted the borrowed perfume, that recognized his new, practiced lies. Those instincts leaned forward. And I listened. Logic said, this could be dangerous. Instinct said, the danger is already here. You're just refusing to turn on the lights. I put my fingers to the keyboard, almost responding, then stopped. No replying, the email said. Whoever sent it wasn't careless. And neither was I. By 7 p.m., the skyline outside my window glowed with gold and ice. Chicago pretending to be warm. Mark texted, running late. Don't wait up. The simplicity of the lie was almost elegant. I stared at the message, then placed my phone face down. I didn't cry. Not even a tear. I was past heartbreak. I was moving toward something sharper. The kind of clarity betrayal creates. I changed clothes, nothing dramatic, just a dark sweater and boots heavy enough to feel grounded. I looked in the mirror. My face was calm, too calm. That's when I knew I was ready. At 8:45, I grabbed my coat and walked out. The hotel on Madison rose like a tower of secrets. Sleek, polished, silent. Inside, the lobby was warm, filled with murmured conversations and the clinking of glasses. None of them belonged to me. I stepped into the elevator, pressed 8. Watched the doors close. When the elevator reached the floor, I stepped into a hallway lined with soft gold lighting. Room 841 was at the end. The door was slightly ajar. The hallway was empty, but the scent wasn't. That same perfume. Sharp, expensive, unmistakable. My heartbeat slowed. Not sped up, slowed. Because when you're approaching the moment that will change your life, your body prepares for impact. I pushed the door open with 2 fingers. The room was dim, lit by the glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. 2 champagne glasses on the table. His jacket hanging on a chair. Her heels on the floor near the bed. A silk shawl carelessly draped across the armrest like a mark of ownership. The bed sheets were a mess. Messy in a way that told the whole story. I didn't need to see them. I didn't need to hear anything. The truth was in the stillness of the room, in the echo of their laughter that hadn't fully died. They were here. Together. Recently, and I was standing in the aftermath. I walked deeper inside. Slow. Measured. A part of me expected pain. The chest-tightening, breath-stealing agony movies always depict. But it didn't come. I felt cold. That kind of cold that no coat can fix. As if something inside me had frozen, and instead of shattering, it simply became quiet. Still. Observant. I touched nothing. I took nothing. This wasn't a crime scene. It was a revelation, and revelations should be treated gently. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A wedding binder on the nightstand. Not Lydia's. His. Inside were notes in his handwriting. Details about the menu. Seating arrangements. Her favorite flowers. Even sketches of the ballroom layout. He was helping her plan the wedding. A wedding he wasn't part of. A wedding he wasn't invited to. A wedding he was somehow entangled in. And the look on his face in the reflected photo made sense now. He was invested deeply. When I closed the binder, a small photograph slipped out. A candid shot. Mark and Lydia. Close. Intimate. Laughing in a way he never laughed with me. But it wasn't the photo that twisted my breath. It was the shadow behind them. A third person in the picture. Blurred. Barely visible. But I recognized the outline. Someone had been following them. And from the angle, that someone might have been following me too. When I left the hotel room, I didn't rush. Didn't slam the door. Didn't break down in the elevator. I walked out the same way I walked in. Calm. Steady. Because I wasn't just discovering betrayal anymore. I was discovering intention. His intentions. Hers. And someone else's. The email sender knew more. Had seen more. And now, I wanted to know everything. When I stepped outside, snow had begun to fall. Chicago swallowing its secrets in white. My phone buzzed. Another email. From the same address. Only one sentence. If you want the whole truth, meet me tomorrow. Alone. Chicago had begun to bury itself in snow. The city, normally roaring, now sounded like a muffled echo of itself. Even the wind seemed cautious, tiptoeing through streets lined with glinting ice. I walked through it with deliberate steps. Boots crunching over powder, phone clutched in my hand. 2 emails, 2 nights, 2 truths stretching before me like a frozen river. Tomorrow, I was meeting the stranger. Alone. And something inside me, the part I didn't like to admit, felt the sharp thrill of danger. Because the truth has a smell and I was going to inhale it, slowly. I spent the day preparing. Not for confrontation, not for anger, but for understanding. I reviewed everything. Mark's erratic schedule, Lydia's public appearances, the hotel binder, the hidden photograph of the third observer. I didn't pack weapons. I didn't plan to chase anyone. I simply memorized details, tracing patterns, imagining outcomes. Control is the only currency a betrayed person can spend wisely. By late afternoon, I had a route planned. A place near the coffee shop where the email had directed me. A neutral location. Safe or as safe as one could be when the world had just shifted. I arrived just before 6 p.m. A small cafe on the corner, warm light spilling onto wet pavement. The kind of place where secrets taste like burnt espresso. I sat at a table by the window, hands folded, eyes alert. At 6:05, a figure approached. Tall. Slightly stooped, as if carrying more than just a coat on their shoulders. A hood pulled low. They sat without speaking. No introductions. No handshakes. Just a nod. You must be Jane, they said finally. Voice low, clipped. No tremor. No warmth. A messenger, not a friend. You don't know what you're in, I said. My voice steady, quieter than I felt. You already know more than you think, they replied. And then, sliding a small folder across the table. Evidence. Inside the folder were photographs, documents, and hotel receipts. All linking Mark to Lydia, not as friends, not as casual flings but as collaborators in something calculated. Hotel stays. Shared credit card transactions. Dinner reservations at high-end restaurants. Invitations to exclusive gala previews. A line in Lydia's planner. Mark will take care of the surprise. Each piece added weight. Each piece made my pulse steady but icy. They weren't just cheating. They were rehearsing their betrayal. I looked up. The stranger was watching me. No judgment. No commentary. Just the quiet understanding of someone who had seen a lie take shape and knew it would fall. The stranger slid one final photograph across the table. A candid taken from across the street outside the Chicago Art Institute. Mark and Lydia, but not alone. A man in a dark coat lurked in the background. Observing, calculating. I knew that silhouette. And it wasn't just a coincidence that it appeared here. In this evidence, someone else had a stake. And they were watching. Jane, the stranger said, eyes fixed. Whatever you do next, don't act on impulse. Don't go to him. Don't confront them. Not yet. I nodded. Even as my chest tightened, even as heartbreak surged through me, sharp and heavy. I understand, I said. Though the truth was I didn't fully understand anything yet. The stranger leaned closer. You'll need patience, more than you've ever had. Because the moment you think you're in control is the moment you're most exposed. After the meeting, I returned to my apartment. The snow had thickened. The streets were deserted. The city holding its breath like me. I sat by the window, folder open, photographs scattered across the table. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt something quieter. Something colder. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes, it whispers. And it whispers your own failures back to you. Mark was gone. Lydia was plotting her wedding. And I was left with the knowledge that people you trust can be meticulously, elegantly wrong. I folded the folder carefully. Placed it in my desk drawer. Not because I forgave, but because I was preparing. That night, as I lay in bed, my phone vibrated. Another email. Subject line. They think you're just watching. They're wrong. Be ready. The words were short, but the weight behind them pressed into my chest. And I knew, without a doubt, this was no longer just about betrayal. It was about power. And the game had begun. I turned off the lights. The snow outside blurred the city into a white haze. I sat in silence. Not in fear. Not in despair. But in calculation. Because heartbreak is a teacher. And patience is a weapon. The next moves would be decisive. And I was ready. Chicago mornings have a way of deceiving you. The city glistens under pale sunlight, promising warmth, stability, normality. While underneath, everything trembles. I had spent 3 days reviewing the folder, retracing Mark's steps, Lydia's appearances, the shadowed third figure in the photograph. By the third night, the clarity I had gained felt like frost spreading over exposed skin, painful but precise. I knew I couldn't just wait anymore. The betrayal wasn't subtle now. It was orchestral, deliberate, carefully choreographed, and I had the perfect vantage point to witness it all unfold. It began with a tip from the stranger. Check their accounts. They're sloppy with details now. Too confident. I did. Mark's business account had multiple transfers to a company I had never heard of. Lydia's planner detailed payments for vendors, florists, photographers, luxury cars, many covered by Mark, many by accounts tracing back to him. And then I found it. A digital folder, labeled, Lydia's wedding full plan. Inside, photos, videos, contracts, and recordings. Recordings. Mark speaking to Lydia not just casually, not just flirtatiously but plotting. Planning her wedding, discussing her image, controlling the narrative, making promises he wouldn't keep me. He wasn't cheating in passion alone. He was performing, strategically. Everything I had felt, everything I had feared, crystallized. This wasn't just a relationship failing. It was a meticulous act of deception. Among the files, I discovered a video labeled, Final Arrangement January 14th. It showed Mark handing Lydia a ring not for him, not for them but for her staged engagement photo shoot. He smiled. Not at me. Not at love. But at control. At the illusion of devotion. And in the background, the shadowed man from the photograph was taking notes, documenting everything. Someone else was complicit or at least observing. I realized, this betrayal extended further than I imagined. Mark wasn't just unfaithful. He was entangled in a plan I hadn't anticipated. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, heart racing, chest tight but calm on the surface. It would have been easy to cry, to scream, to confront. But I didn't. Because anger without strategy is wasted energy. And I had just discovered a battlefield. Mark and Lydia had assumed I was unaware. That my silence was weakness, they were wrong. I felt heartbreak, yes. But beneath it, a current of fury began to pulse cold, measured, unstoppable. And for the first time, I tasted the clarity of revenge without noise. Then I found the email chain. Mark had been coordinating with Lydia for months, choosing colors that would distract Jane, planning events that would occupy my attention, making promises of affection while sneaking gifts, meetings and coded communications to Lydia, and the final line of one email made my blood freeze. Jane suspects nothing. We are untouchable. Untouchable. They thought their arrogance could shield them from me. From the truth. From consequences. I smiled. Not because I was happy. Not yet. But because I had a plan. And plans are the sharpest weapons of all. I thought I knew betrayal. I thought I knew deceit. But the stranger had warned me. When you think you're in control, you're exposed. And here it was, the hidden hand in the shadows, the third party observing, recording, possibly orchestrating. I realized that Mark's and Lydia's recklessness wasn't just arrogance, it was vulnerability. And someone who had watched all along was waiting for the perfect moment to tip the scale. That someone might have been me. I closed the folder, locked my desk, and walked to the window. Chicago glittered below me, a city of lights and secrets. I planned. And planning is the most dangerous silence of all. The city outside my window buzzed on with life, oblivious to the storm inside me. Chicago traffic, distant sirens, pedestrians crunching through snow, everything moved like normal. Inside, I felt fractured. Not broken, fractured. Every detail from the folder replayed. Mark's voice in the videos, Lydia's laughter, the shadowed man taking notes in the background. The betrayal had weight. A weight that pressed into my chest like ice against skin. And yet, strangely, the crushing heaviness sharpened me. Made me quieter. More observant. More patient. I poured a cup of tea, letting the steam fog my glasses. I imagined confronting him, Mark tearing words from him, demanding answers. And I realized I would gain nothing. His defenses would rise, his excuses would flow, and my anger would evaporate into nothing. No, that wasn't justice. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't visible. It was precise. Betrayal is a blade. Most people brandish it. I would keep it sheathed. Until the perfect strike. Anger has a rhythm. Mine pulsed quietly, like a heartbeat I could control. I began testing Mark. Small questions, casual tones, observations wrapped as concern. How was the gala last night? You seemed distracted yesterday, everything okay? He deflected, smiled, offered hollow assurances. I watched him falter ever so slightly. A hesitation, a pause, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. Every reaction confirmed my suspicion. He knew I knew. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to make me dangerous. Because awareness breeds power. That evening, I received another email. From the stranger. Short. They are careless. Observe. Take note. Prepare. Careless. I liked that word. It told me I had room to maneuver. Space to turn betrayal into leverage. And leverage is more intoxicating than revenge. Over the next 3 days, I began cataloging everything. Mark's movements, Lydia's social appearances, the patterns of secrecy, the emails and subtle hints of the third party. I mapped it all in a digital timeline. Connections, sequences, anomalies. Each discovery fed my anger. Not blind anger but deliberate, sharpened fury. The more I watched, the more I realized. This wasn't just about Mark or Lydia. It was about control, about ego, about arrogance. And the higher their arrogance, the easier it would be to break them. I started planting subtle signals. A text left on his phone, carefully worded, hinting I knew more than I had admitted. A casual question about his schedule, watching his eyes flicker. Small things innocuous to him, loaded with meaning to me. The goal wasn't confrontation. The goal was observation. To watch the cracks widen naturally. Because people who cheat, who plot, who lie, they reveal themselves when they feel untouchable. And they were feeling untouchable. Late one night, I watched them on social media, Mark and Lydia at a charity gala. But something was off. In the background of a live-streamed shot, I saw the silhouette again. The shadowed figure, the one in the photograph. Watching. And this time, I felt it. The scale was bigger than I imagined. Not just two people betraying me. A network. A plan. And I would need to dismantle it carefully. I closed the laptop, placed the folder back in its drawer. The city lights reflected off the snow, mirrored in my eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply made a promise to myself. They had underestimated me. They had assumed my silence was weakness. They would soon learn it was something far more dangerous: patience, strategy, and inevitability. And I would watch every move before I struck. The folder sat before me, open on the desk, illuminated by the dim glow of a desk lamp. Photographs, receipts, contracts, emails, all evidence of betrayal meticulously compiled. I spread them across the table like pieces of a chessboard. Every move they had made over the last 6 months was now visible. Their patterns predictable, their confidence naive. And I, who had been silent and patient, had become the only piece capable of toppling them. The art of revenge is timing. Observation first, precision second. Emotion finally, at the right moment. The next email arrived promptly. Jane, you've seen the surface. But the truth is deeper. Look closer. Timing is everything. I reread it. The stranger had not revealed themselves. They never did. But their presence was a force, an invisible ally, whispering strategy into my hands. I began my audit of everything. Mark's personal schedule and hidden meetings. Lydia's social calendar and public appearances. Past communications and coded messages. The third party, the shadow in the background. Every error they had made became a potential weapon. Every indiscretion an opportunity. And every lie proof that they believed themselves untouchable. While reviewing a credit card statement, I noticed something subtle. A payment Mark had made months ago was incorrectly labeled. Not to Lydia, not to a vendor, but to a mysterious account in another city. This was not just betrayal, it was movement behind the scenes. Something I hadn't seen before. Something larger than their affair. And it required immediate attention. I began implementing small psychological nudges. Subtle texts to Mark, hinting awareness of his duplicity, casual remarks in conversation, testing his reaction, watching Lydia's posts for inconsistencies, small slips of arrogance. Each test revealed the cracks I had anticipated. Small hesitations, fleeting panic, micro-expressions of guilt, all building the foundation of a quiet, invisible revenge. Because vengeance is rarely about confrontation. It's about anticipation. And they had given me every advantage. Late one night, the stranger sent another email with a file attached. It was a recording I hadn't expected. Mark in a private meeting, discussing not just the affair but a financial scheme. He had promised Lydia investments that didn't exist. He had lied to multiple associates, covering debts and promising futures he could not deliver. This was no longer only betrayal of love. This was betrayal in business, reputation, and trust. And it widened the battlefield. Now, revenge could be quiet and precise or loud and devastating. And I could choose. Among the files, one document caught my eye. A scanned contract with Lydia's signature dated 2 months ago. The content: Mark's promise to transfer a significant portion of his inheritance to Lydia after the wedding. He was planning to leave me not just emotionally, but financially and socially powerless. And the stranger's note beneath it simply said, "They think you're blind. They've underestimated the predator in silence." I began drafting my strategy. Observation phase. Gather every detail. Understand every lie, track movements. Strategic leverage. Identify the cracks, weaknesses, and points of overconfidence. Controlled exposure. Decide the exact timing, the exact medium, and the audience for the reveal. Silent execution. Let them unravel on their own. While maintaining my calm and invisibility. I would not act in haste. I would not show anger. I would let fate, opportunity, and their own arrogance work against them. Because when people believe themselves untouchable, their fall is poetic. And I had front row seats. I closed the laptop, locked the folder away, stared at the city lights glittering under the snow. I felt calm, powerful, patient. The battlefield was visible, the players were exposed, and the first pieces of my revenge were now in motion. Revenge doesn't start with explosions. It starts with whispers. Shifts so small, they resemble coincidence. Accidents no one questions. The kind of changes you feel before you see. Like the first crack in a frozen lake, inaudible, but fatal if ignored. I woke with that clarity. A calm resolve. A steady pulse. The kind of stillness that happens just before something breaks. Today would be the first move. A minor one barely noticeable to anyone but me. But every avalanche begins with a single vibration. Over the last week, I mapped the vulnerabilities. Not emotional ones, those were too easy, too predictable. I wanted structural weakness. Points where one small shake could cause a cascade of collapse. Mark had two. His professional reputation, his financial secrecy. Lydia had three. Her public image, her obsession with status, her upcoming wedding's fragile timeline. But there was a shared vulnerability. A connecting thread they didn't realize I could access. Their confidence. And confidence, when manipulated correctly, becomes a weapon. One they wield against themselves. I crafted an email, short, ambiguous, destructive, sent from an untraceable account to Mark. Your meetings aren't as private as you think. Someone is watching. Someone close. No signature. No threats. No details. Just enough to plant a seed. Then I waited. He read it at 9:14 a.m., paused for 8 seconds, reread it, locked his phone. And for the first time in months, he arrived late to his next appointment. Not much. Barely noticeable. But a shift. A tremor. The start of something inevitable. Lydia reacted before Mark did. Posting cryptic stories about choosing loyalty and removing negativity. Subtle, dramatic statements. Her usual digital theater. But the stranger, my quiet phantom ally, sent me a single line that made my pulse tighten. They've started blaming each other. Perfect. Internal fractures are louder than external attacks. All I needed to do was watch. Over the next 2 days, their behavior changed. Mark became restless, checking his phone constantly. Lydia grew defensive online, paranoid beneath her glamorous facade. Their texts to each other increased. Short. Clipped, suspicious. Not a collapse. Not yet. But friction. Heat. Pressure. And pressure works wonders on fragile alliances. All without me lifting anything heavier than a keyboard. The wedding was Lydia's masterpiece. Her chance to prove her grandeur to the city's elite. And weddings, especially high society weddings, depend on perfect timing. So I made one call. Just one. To one of her premium vendors. The florist. I introduced myself as Lydia's assistant, warm, polite, apologetic. I explained there had been a slight change to her event schedule. A new delivery date. A new time. Just enough to create a logistical domino effect. The florist apologized profusely and agreed. These things happen, she said. They do. Especially when someone who understands timing orchestrates them. 2 days later, Lydia's planner posted a furious story. The florals were delivered to the wrong venue. Fixing this mistake will take hours. Someone sabotaged this. But my stranger sent another quiet message. She suspects sabotage. She suspects everyone but not you. And that was the turning point. The first true crack in Lydia's carefully curated world. One that would widen with the next moves. I sat in my living room that night, a cup of tea warming my hands. Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the city in white silence. I wasn't smiling. Revenge isn't joyous, not yet. It's steady, calm, measured. This wasn't about hurting them. Not directly. Not emotionally. It was about destabilizing them carefully, quietly. Forcing them to reveal the cracks they hid behind polished photos and curated facades. Tonight, the air felt different. Charged. Expectant. The first tremor had passed. The avalanche was on its way. They just didn't know which direction it would come from. The city felt smaller now. Every street, every corner, every corridor of power in Chicago became a stage for observation. From my apartment, I watched them, Mark and Lydia, through the lens of patience and silence. The minor disruptions I had sown 2 days prior had begun their work. Mark checked his phone obsessively, missing minor appointments. Lydia posted anxious, cryptic updates on social media. Their texts had grown clipped, defensive, paranoid. Every subtle misstep, every visible crack, fed the momentum I was cultivating. This was no longer just revenge. It was strategy in motion. I began a series of small, seemingly random interventions. A delayed email from a vendor to Mark's assistant, hinting at missing contracts. A polite, anonymous note to Lydia about a scheduling conflict with her rehearsal dinner. Observations recorded meticulously in my planner: timing, reaction, microexpressions, phone behaviors. Each ripple I created was a test. a way to gauge their fragility, to understand how much pressure it would take before the first crack became a chasm. One evening, I received an unexpected text. "Are you sure she won't notice you are manipulating this?" No sender. My pulse quickened not with fear, but with recognition. The stranger had reached out again. Watching, guiding, testing me as I tested them. The game had expanded. I was no longer alone in this pursuit. And neither were Mark and Lydia. I identified their most sensitive vulnerabilities. Lydia, her need for perfection in social appearances. Mark, his desire for control and reputation. I intensified subtle pressures. Lydia's florist mix-up turned into multiple minor errors. Mark received an anonymous tip about an upcoming inspection from his professional board. Small things, small enough to seem coincidental, but consistent, relentless. The pattern was invisible to them, but it was devastating. I began cataloging the effects. Lydia's anxiety became public short, clipped posts hinting at frustration. Mark's normally smooth confidence cracked in meetings, and I documented it meticulously. Their interactions with each other became tense, filled with suspicion and microaggressions. Watching them unravel was not cruelty, it was revelation. The more they trusted their facade, the more fragile it became. And I, silent and invisible, was the unseen hand guiding the cracks. One afternoon, I discovered something entirely unanticipated. A small but critical detail in Lydia's wedding timeline. An unconfirmed booking for the photographer, overlapping with another high-profile event. If the timing went wrong, the chaos would be public. And it would humiliate her. Perfect, too perfect. And just as I smiled at the inevitability, my phone buzzed. A new email from the stranger. She doesn't know who's truly behind it. "You've earned the next move." I realized that the small tests, the subtle manipulations, had achieved their purpose. They were anxious, distrustful, already starting to fracture. It was time to escalate, not to attack blindly, not to reveal myself, but to set the stage for a domino effect that would force them to act recklessly. The first major moves of true, irreversible disruption would be next. I closed my planner and leaned back in my chair. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the city crisp and bright under a pale afternoon sun. I felt no triumph, no malice, only certainty. Because the first tremors were no longer enough. The second phase would reveal the true fragility of those who believed themselves untouchable. I had thought I knew the battlefield. Every move, every vulnerability mapped and catalogued. Every minor disruption executed. But the city has a way of hiding truths in plain sight. A single email, subject line unread, sat in my inbox. "You're closer than you think." Open carefully. No sender. No context. Just the file. Curiosity is dangerous, but so is ignoring it. I opened it. Inside was a video. Not Mark or Lydia. Not a vendor slip-up. A third figure familiar yet hidden walking through my apartment building, observing entrances, exits, noting times. The shadow from the photographs. But there was more. The timestamp on the video placed them in Chicago 2 weeks ago, the day Mark and Lydia made their first financial manipulations. And the footage included copies of emails and contracts they had intercepted. Someone else had been orchestrating, monitoring, manipulating. It wasn't just Mark and Lydia, it was bigger. And I had just stepped into the center of it. I replayed the video. The figure wore gloves. No face visible. But the movements. Familiar. The handwriting in the intercepted notes. The timing. The precision. It matched the stranger. Not a helper. Not just an observer. A strategist. Someone whose motives I didn't yet understand. And suddenly, the carefully controlled game I had been playing felt smaller. Secondary. Part of someone else's design. I leaned back in my chair. The city lights reflected in my eyes, but I barely noticed. I had thought my revenge was quiet, invisible, inevitable. And it was. But now I knew. There was a player I hadn't accounted for. Someone with insight into everything I had done. I had to rethink. Not abandon. Not pause. But recalibrate. The stakes were higher than I had imagined. And the game had grown exponentially. The stranger's next email arrived within the hour. "Jane, you see the threads now. Don't act in haste. Observe. The next move is yours, but so is the risk." I realized that this wasn't merely a game of betrayal and revenge. It was a chess match with a hidden player. and one misstep could expose everything I had carefully built. But I didn't fear it. I welcomed it. The revelation changed everything. The third party could be leveraged without revealing myself. Their surveillance became an unintended advantage. I now knew their blind spots. The stakes forced me to refine my moves. More subtle, more precise, more inevitable. Betrayal is layered. And the deeper the layer, the more satisfying the unmasking. I now had not just Mark and Lydia's weaknesses but the broader structure of control itself. Everything they believed untouchable was within reach. And the apex of my plan had just been recalibrated. I closed the video, locked the files, and poured myself a cup of tea. No triumph. No malice. Only clarity. The battlefield had expanded. The enemy was larger. The chessboard was wider. But one truth remained. I had patience. I had observation. And now, more than ever, I had purpose. Let them think they are untouchable. Let them crumble in their own shadow. The snow had melted from Chicago's streets, leaving wet asphalt and a faint metallic scent in the air. The city was alive, unaware of the quiet storm I was about to unleash. I had waited. Patiently. Calculated every move. Measured every reaction from Mark and Lydia over the past weeks. Today, the first irreversible domino would fall. I opened my carefully organized planner. Lydia's wedding timeline, cross-referenced with Mark's business meetings, vendor schedules, delivery times, overlaps, and conflicts. Minor disruptions I had already seeded now amplified. Everything was aligned. Every tiny crack would widen. And I would remain invisible. Because revenge is at its most exquisite when the victim doesn't know its source. I sent an anonymous email to Lydia's wedding coordinator. There's been a scheduling conflict. Please confirm all vendors immediately. Simple, polite, untraceable. Within an hour, the first disruptions rippled outward. The florist had double-booked the primary venue. The photographer was accidentally scheduled at a different location. The catering team arrived an hour early, before the ceremony space was prepared. Lydia's carefully curated facade began to crumble. And Mark, in the background, was unaware that the chaos wasn't natural. By mid-afternoon, Lydia sent frantic texts to Mark. The florist messed up again. I don't know what to do. Someone is sabotaging us. I can't trust anyone. Mark's calm, controlling demeanor cracked. He snapped at a staff member, then froze mid-conversation, realizing his control over events was slipping. And I sat quietly in my apartment, watching the first visible cracks form. Patience had done its work. Now, momentum was on my side. By evening, the domino effect intensified. Lydia posted an anxious story. Perfection is overrated. Chaos surrounds me. Mark's professional email went out with a glaring error, typos in a high-profile document, unseen by his staff until the last minute. The third-party shadow observed, captured in my email attachments, providing insight I could leverage for the next moves. Their arrogance, their assumption that I was silent and powerless, was unraveling. And it was beautiful, quiet, icy, inevitable. Late that night, a new message arrived from the stranger. You forced the first cracks. They think it's luck, coincidence, chaos, but it's you. Keep the pressure. I realized that the execution wasn't just about disruption. It was about observation of collapse. And their reactions were revealing weaknesses I hadn't anticipated. Lydia panicked when faced with imperfection. Mark's obsession with control made him predictable and vulnerable. The avalanche had begun. And I had front-row seats. I reviewed social media, texts, and leaked messages. Lydia vented publicly, thinly veiled frustration toward Mark. Mark's confidence faltered in meetings. Colleagues noted subtle changes in tone. Both were acting defensively, suspicious of each other, unaware that the external chaos was orchestrated by me. Watching the unraveling was not vindictive. It was strategy. I wasn't reacting to emotion, I was directing it. And the turning point was clear. They were beginning to crumble from within, not just from my external manipulations. I closed my laptop. The city lights shimmered against the wet streets. I didn't smile. I didn't revel. I only felt the still, icy satisfaction of inevitability. They had assumed silence meant weakness. But silence is the most powerful weapon. The first strike was complete. And the avalanche, slow, deliberate, unstoppable, was rolling toward them. By morning, the consequences of my first strike had multiplied. Chaos was no longer isolated, it was contagious. Lydia's wedding vendors collided in a chain reaction. Photographers double-booked, clients cancelled last minute, floral arrangements delayed, leaving empty spaces at high tables. The caterers arrived too early, causing last-minute venue conflicts. And Mark's professional reputation began to fray. Typos in his high-profile emails became discussion points in his office. Subtle miscommunications leaked to colleagues. The veneer of control he prized so dearly was cracking in front of everyone. By noon, a subtle argument erupted between Mark and Lydia. "Why didn't you confirm the florist?" Lydia snapped in a text visible to staff. "I didn't receive the schedule properly." Mark fired back. The cracks widened. Frustration bled into suspicion. And all of it was traceable to a hand they couldn't see. I watched quietly, sipping tea, absorbing every tremor of panic and doubt. Patience, once more, was my ally. I had learned early that stress exposes character. And their character was brittle. Lydia panicked, delegating tasks without oversight, creating more errors. Mark attempted to regain control but made hasty decisions, compounding mistakes. Vendors and assistants, overwhelmed by conflicting instructions, grew anxious and unreliable. The first disruption had multiplied into chaos. Their world was unraveling, and all I had done was whisper into the wind. Later that evening, Lydia posted another cryptic story. "Control is an illusion. Some people think they can hide everything, until it collapses." Mark noticed the post. His eyes flickered with suspicion, scanning her activity, checking messages, questioning loyalty. And the stranger, my hidden guide, sent a final line that night. "They don't know it's you yet. Soon, the entire structure will tremble." I realized the domino effect was complete. Subtle disruptions had now escalated into full psychological pressure, and the cracks were growing into chasms. I cataloged their reactions meticulously, texts riddled with passive aggression, miscommunications spilling into minor public exposure, increasing distrust between the two conspirators. They assumed coincidence. They assumed bad luck. They assumed no one was orchestrating the chaos. And that was their fatal mistake. Late at night, Mark left his email open on a colleague's computer, his frustration apparent. "Nothing is going as planned. Who is behind this?" The realization was creeping in. They were losing control. And their panic, once subtle, was now observable, undeniable. The avalanche was no longer avoidable. And I had positioned myself at its center, silent, patient, invisible, unstoppable. I closed my planner and stared out at the city. The skyline glittered, indifferent to human chaos. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I only observed. The major consequences had unfolded. The domino effect was complete. And I, silent, patient, calculating, had watched inevitability take its course. Chicago lights flickered through my apartment windows as dusk settled. I had watched them crumble from afar, but tonight I needed to see the fractures up close. Not to engage recklessly. Not to confront with anger. But to observe, confirm, and direct the final sequence of their unraveling. They were unaware I was already several steps ahead. The panic, suspicion, and errors had not been random. They had been choreographed, silent, deliberate, inevitable. I arrived at Lydia's apartment under the pretense of a casual visit. She didn't expect me. Mark certainly didn't. The moment I entered, the energy shifted. Lydia's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her decor. Mark's jaw tightened, his usual mask of control faltering. And all of it, every subtle sign of panic, every micro-expression, was a confirmation. Lydia began to speak, nervously, as if trying to rationalize the chaos. "Everything is going wrong. I don't know how it's happening." Mark interjected, defensive. "I don't know either. Someone is sabotaging us." I listened quietly, noting every hesitation, every eye flicker. The cracks weren't just visible, they were audible. I didn't accuse. I didn't scream. I smiled softly. "It seems things are unraveling," I said. Mark froze. Lydia's lips parted slightly, panic flickering in her eyes. I didn't have to say more. They knew. They both knew. And that knowledge, unspoken, undeniable, was more powerful than any words. I stepped closer, maintaining calm, measured presence. "You assumed silence meant weakness," I whispered. "But silence is the most dangerous thing someone can underestimate." Lydia's voice cracked. You've known this whole time?" Mark's jaw clenched. The room's air thickened with tension. And I realized, this was the turning point, the moment they fully recognized the inevitability of their collapse. I allowed them to process, silently, the weight of their own mistakes and my patience. Lydia wrung her hands, scanning for an explanation. Mark's gaze flickered from me to her, suspicion and fear intermingling. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I only existed in their presence, a living reminder of their arrogance and my calculated patience. The psychological pressure was a weapon more lethal than confrontation, and it worked. Lydia finally broke. I didn't think you would see. I thought we controlled everything. Mark stammered, attempting excuses, defenses, anything to reclaim control. But control had already slipped. And I, calm, patient and cold, watched as their empire of deceit crumbled in the face of silence. They realized, too late, that the most powerful force wasn't chaos, anger or exposure, it was inevitability. And I had been the quiet architect all along. I left that night without further words. No confrontation. No dramatic exit. Just a calm, measured departure. They were broken. Not humiliated in public, not yet, but shattered from within. And I, patient, calculating and unseen, had delivered the quietest and most absolute victory. Chicago's skyline glittered under the early evening sky. I walked past the streets, quiet, unseen, knowing every step I had taken in recent weeks had led to this moment. The minor disruptions, the calculated psychological pressure, the domino effect, they had all brought Mark and Lydia here, fragile, anxious, exposed. But the story wasn't over. The final twist, the climax, was still in my hands. Lydia's meticulously planned high society wedding began without incident, or so everyone believed. The guests arrived, champagne glasses sparkling, gowns pristine, but behind the perfect facade, the florist's error had left several key tables barren. The photographer had captured moments out of order, creating confusion in the official albums. The catering schedule faltered, leaving delays that no one could anticipate. And then, the final domino fell. I had anonymously emailed the venue management with proof of a duplicate reservation, a legal discrepancy in the lease and event permits. The city inspectors arrived unexpectedly, just as Lydia's proudest moment was unfolding. Guests murmured. Lydia froze. Mark turned pale. Everything they had built, status, wealth, reputation, was crumbling in public view. The crowd noticed the tension. Whispers spread like wildfire. Is this legal? Who authorized this? Something's terribly wrong. Lydia's panic was palpable. Mark's attempts to regain control only made them look more guilty. And I was nowhere to be seen. The twist wasn't only the chaos they believed it was coincidence. They were still blind to the invisible hand that had orchestrated it all. I didn't need confrontation anymore. I didn't need to speak. The chaos, compounded over weeks, had achieved maximum effect. Mark's arrogance had become public embarrassment. Lydia's curated perfection shattered in front of high society peers. Both were trapped in a web of their own making, now impossible to reconcile. The final move was observation. Watching them navigate consequences they could not control. Watching them crumble without realizing the architect was silent, calm and poised. Late that evening, a friend of Lydia's sent me a photograph. Lydia seated, head bowed, tears welling. Mark beside her, stiff, defensive, guests murmuring, cameras flashing. I smiled slightly, not out of cruelty, but out of inevitability. All their efforts, all their deceit, all their arrogance had been undone by patience, precision, and silence. And the stranger, my unseen guide, sent one last message. You've completed the final move. Fate itself bowed to your design. I did not gloat. I did not speak to them. I had orchestrated a victory that required no confrontation, no theatrics, no public declaration. The collapse was visible, the consequences were real, and the power balance had shifted permanently. The world had seen them falter, but only I knew the full extent of the plan, the precision, the patience, the inevitability, and that knowledge was the ultimate victory. I walked away from the chaos quietly, the city lights reflecting in puddles along the streets. No celebrations, no confrontation, no lingering anger. Only calm, only control, only the satisfaction of inevitability. Mark and Lydia had fallen not through my malice but through their own arrogance and choices. Silence is louder than screams. And patience is stronger than fury. Chicago streets felt different the morning after the chaos. The snow had returned, dusting the sidewalks in pristine white, as if the city itself were erasing the traces of panic and disruption. I walked through it quietly, observing without being observed. The chaos I had orchestrated had left visible cracks in their world, but mine remained intact, silent, untouched. No one knew my role. No one would. And that was the power of patience. I reviewed the aftermath from a distance. Lydia's social standing had taken subtle yet permanent hits, her perfectionism now scrutinized by friends and colleagues. Mark's professional credibility had been shaken. Minor errors now amplified by gossip and suspicion. Their alliance had been weakened, trust frayed, and every action now second-guessed. It wasn't destruction for destruction's sake. It was inevitability. And observing it unfold quietly, without intervention, was far more satisfying than confrontation. A message arrived from the stranger one evening. The structures have crumbled. Your work is done. Now, rebuild. I realized the lesson embedded in the chaos. Victory isn't just about dismantling the wrongdoers, it's about reclaiming your life. And so, I began. I focused on my own world, my apartment, now organized as a sanctuary rather than a place of surveillance. Professional projects, which I had neglected during the weeks of strategic observation, received careful attention. Relationships I had set aside were nurtured, those who valued honesty and integrity. Every decision, every step forward, was deliberate. Not reactive. Not impulsive. This was reconstruction after observation. Empowerment after strategy. One morning, I received a subtle message from Lydia, publicly vague, privately tense. Things have changed. We can no longer assume control. I smiled softly. No reply. No acknowledgement. Silence remained my ally. And they would always remember the consequences of underestimating it. I spent time reflecting on the lessons. Patience outweighs impulse. Observation reveals more than confrontation. Power is quiet, invisible, and undeniable. I had orchestrated chaos without exposure. I had observed, tested, and exploited vulnerabilities without a single reckless move. And I had emerged not only victorious but strengthened. This was not just revenge. It was reclamation. The restoration of self, dignity, and control. I stepped onto my balcony as the sun set, casting golden light across the city. No celebrations. No dramatic announcements. No vindictive messages. Just calm. Just observation. Just empowerment. I had dismantled the arrogance of others. I had reclaimed my life. And I had done it quietly, without fanfare. Without recognition, but with absolute inevitability. Chicago woke slowly beneath a pale winter sky. The streets were quiet, wet with melted snow, shimmering in the first light. I walked along the familiar avenues, observing, listening, breathing. The city moved around me, oblivious to the events of the past weeks. And I moved through it quietly, carrying a calm sense of purpose. I thought back to everything that had occurred. The first suspicion, the quiet observations, the minor manipulations, the escalating pressure, the domino effect, the psychological breakdown, the final twist at the wedding, the unseen hand guiding chaos, the public unraveling of arrogance. It wasn't about revenge alone. It was about understanding human nature, patience, and timing. It was about knowing that the most powerful moves are often unseen, silent, and deliberate. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it acts only when the moment is inevitable. I had learned. Observation is stronger than confrontation. Patience is sharper than rage. Silence is more permanent than words. And in that, I found my true strength. I thought of Mark and Lydia. Not with hatred, not with anger, but with clarity. They had underestimated me. They had assumed silence meant weakness. And that was their mistake. I did not need to destroy them publicly. I did not need to shout. I only needed to act with precision, patience, and inevitability. And in the end, the moral was simple. True power is quiet. True revenge is deliberate. True victory comes from reclaiming control, not causing chaos for its own sake. If you ever face betrayal, arrogance, or deceit, remember, you do not need to confront loudly. You do not need to react impulsively. Observe. Wait. Plan. And act when the moment is undeniable, because silence, patience, and precision are the ultimate power. What has been the most powerful moment of quiet triumph in your life? Comment below and share your story because strength often lies in subtlety. Subscribe to see how strategy, patience, and observation can shape real-life victories. I returned to my apartment, the city quiet beneath the rising sun. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need applause. I only needed the certainty that I had acted with intelligence, patience, and purpose. And that was enough. In silence, I found my strength. In patience, my power. And in inevitability, my victory.